Hi, everyone. It's William, and we are very close to the end of the 1906 diary entries because today we are skipping all the way from the 21st of September to the 3rd of December. So that was quite a gap again in Dimitri's usually very disciplined diary keeping. But he's 15, he's got more going on apparently. And yeah, so we are going to go from the 3rd. We'll start today with the 3rd of December. We'll have the 3rd and the 4th. And then we're skipping ahead to 1907, starting a new year. So let's see. Let's get going with the 3rd of December. And I was surprised to see, as I mentioned yesterday, that they were, as Dmitri had hoped, in Tsarskaya Selo. Apparently for the winter, although I'm not sure about that. So they arrived on, the day of today's diary entry on the 3rd. All right, so let's dive in. Reading through what I wrote in my diary, I've come to the conclusion that it's a great thing to do. Well, we're back in good old Tsarskaya, and though we only arrived today, it seems to me like we've been here forever. Thank God we arrived here safely. I was again troubled by unpleasant thoughts that we wouldn't make it. Truly very strange. I remember how scared I was to go to the theater for the first time this year. The devil knows why. This morning we went straight from the station to liturgy. Tjotja wasn't with us because she had a really bad headache. After a very tiresome Sunday lunch, I took a walk with Uncle. For me, it was so nice to see all of them, and they too were seemingly happy. Tea was at 5 o'clock, and then I sat down and read until now. The only thing I'm sorry about is that we're in the Alexander Palace instead of the big palace. 7:45. Okay, so even though he's not describing in detail the events or the things he's doing today or the things he did in the interval between the end of September and the beginning of December, it's still quite an important and interesting diary entry. So we start out with him looking back over what he had written, and perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but I get the impression that the diary was something that he'd started at the beginning of the year and maybe hadn't been doing previously because he has come to the conclusion that it's a great thing to do. And I couldn't agree more with that. I'm glad that he came to that conclusion because even with these jumps now and then, it's still so interesting and I think so important to him emotionally. And, we're probably learning more about him than about the inner person than a lot of people who were there and were part of his life because he seems to have been rather reticent, certainly what he was as an adult, to talk about his feelings and even his opinions of some things. So we are fortunate in that respect. So back in good old Tsarskaya, and it feels like we've been here forever. So this was the place that he wanted to be. We'll see when he was an adult that he has a lot of that he had a lot of nostalgic memories about Moscow and himself as a Muscovite. But for the moment, he wants to be in Tsarskaya, I guess not only because of the people there that he likes to be around, especially Uncle Nicky, but also because of his anxiety around being in Moscow after everything that had happened the previous year. So we go right into that. So if there was a theme of today's diary entry, it would certainly be anxiety and trauma. So I've talked at some length about the effect of trauma on various Romanovs. I also was talking about it in my series, The Romanov Dynasty of Russia, and specifically, it's hard for me to even imagine. I had plenty of anxieties when I was 15, but I had not had an experience like Dmitri and Maria, and Ella for that matter, had seeing Grand Duke Sergei, the custodial parent in the case of Dmitri and Marie, seeing the aftermath of his assassination, being very nearby when that assassination occurred, and witnessing the immediate aftermath. And it was a very gruesome one, as you know. And in fact, even before that, there had been the incident when Dmitri and Maria and both Sergei and Ella had been in a carriage going to the theater. And there had been a terrorist waiting with a bomb. The terrorist had very carefully studied the Grand Duke Sergei's schedule, and also the sort of things that the family attended, the sort of theater performances, and what it said, you know, in the newspaper about their comings and goings, because they did print things like that at that time. And so they were waiting for the carriage, or one of them was waiting. His name was Ivan Kalyaev, and he was waiting with a bomb. And when he saw Dmitri and Maria through the window of the carriage, which must have been moving quite slowly, he couldn't do it. And he was later, when he returned to the other members of the terrorist cell and told them that he hadn't been able to do it because of the children, they had actually berated him for that. They were, you know, they were hardcore terrorists. The rest of them, you know, supposedly, so they said, would have killed Dmitri and Maria in order to get to Uncle Sergei. So did the children know about that? I think they did. Maria says in her memoirs that initially she remembered the coachman, you know, spurring the horses forward, and the coach starting to go very fast, faster than it would ordinarily, and the coachman had spotted the terrorist. And yeah, it's pretty hard to keep something like that from children if they're curious and if they're determined to know what was going on. And she also talks about how determined Dmitri and she were to know what was going on, to the extent that they would try to sneak into their uncle's office and get whatever information they could. So he probably knew that he was that close to being killed, and we've seen in past diary entries that he had a hard time grappling with the idea that there were people in Moscow who wanted to kill him. And we've also seen that when he first went to Ilyinsky in May, he was very disturbed by the thought that the peasants might kill all of them. And so, you know, the obvious aftermath to the trauma he's experienced is this anxiety. And I don't know if he was an anxious kid before all this happened, but he certainly was after. And I think that was something then that would dog him at other periods of his life. He seems to have had a lot of anxiety too. For instance, when he was banished from Russia after the Rasputin assassination, and there was some idea again that there might be people who wanted to kill him, and he had to change, he had to move to a completely foreign place where he didn't know people. He had so much anxiety and depression initially that it was really crippling. And he was really sort of prostrated with that. So anyway, when he wrote before about being afraid that the peasants would kill them in Ilinskaya, he qualified it by saying that he knew that was silly, but he couldn't help it. And so this time we have the same thing. He was, thank God, he says, we arrived safely because he had been troubled once more by unpleasant thoughts that we wouldn't make it. So maybe he was thinking that the train might be attacked. Um, and yeah, so he once again follows that up by saying, truly very strange that he would have those kind of thoughts. And then he also follows up by saying that he recalls how scared he was to go to the theater at the beginning of 1906. And so, there must have been some diary entry that we missed because he did skip a fair number of diary entries. So there must have been one early in 1906 that where they'd gone to the theater and where, he was afraid that something was going to happen to him there, that he was going to be attacked in the theater there. And so, did he talk to anyone about this? I mean, there's the one instance when they first arrive in Ilinskaya, and he's so obviously depressed. And Ella says something to him to the effect that, well, maybe it's bothering you that we have sort of extra guards around the estate. And at that time, he was saying, no, that's not it. He was kind of over that anxiety. But the point being that she had noticed there was something wrong, and that she had drawn that conclusion. So maybe he had talked to her, maybe he had talked to GM about being afraid, about things like going to the theater or moving to Ilinskaya or going back train travel or going from one place to another seems to have been a particular point of concern for him. But, I hope he talked to someone. All right, and let's see. So they're back, and the children are sent straight to church. It's a Sunday. Apparently, it was an overnight train that they took from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and they arrive in the morning, and the children are sent straight to church for the liturgy. It's a Sunday, but Ella, Tyotia, didn't go because she had this horrible headache. All right, and then they go to Sunday lunch with the emperor and empress. Probably quite a few people would be my guess. I don't know, but it's boring or tiresome. But the nice thing is that Dmitri gets to go on a walk with with Dядя, Uncle Nicky. Dядя is the Russian word for uncle. He gets to do that after lunch. And he's not telling us how that went, so I think he's still a little unsettled. There's still a little anxiety, a little bit of, of feeling insecure. Because his mood, as we've talked about in the past, is always very apparent from how he approaches his diary entries. And this time, he's focusing on his fears, and he's not giving us details of the things that he's doing that day. He's more reticent. So, and here's where a little bit of the usual insecurity comes in, because it's so nice for him to see all of them. Presumably, Nicholas and Alexandra and the other officers and adjutants that he knew. And he adds that they, for their part, seemed to be happy with seeing him again. So he's never going to say straight out, oh, they were so happy to see me. That's just not him. There's always just that little bit of caution He doesn't want to feel like he can take it for granted that they were happy to see him. So for the rest of the day, well, from tea time, so for about 2.5 hours, he was just sitting quietly and reading. And we'll see if he resumes the reading, the evening reading that he and Maria and the Lamings were doing together. But he's 15, and he's able to do his own reading, whether it's homework reading or pleasure reading. And then he makes this interesting comment that he would rather be staying in the big palace than in the Alexander Palace. So the big palace was the Catherine Palace, which was also part of the imperial family's complex, you could say, in Tsarskaya Selo. And they weren't staying in the big palace when they were there before. They were staying, I don't think so, because it sounded like you would talk about going both to the Alexander Palace and sometimes to the big palace, and that they were staying at whatever palace Paul had, where they had their old playground and and Dimitri's old outdoor toy train. So I think the difference this time is that they're with Ella, and apparently Ella isn't just dropping them off in Tsarskaya for safety's sake and then going back to Moscow herself. Apparently this time they are a family. She's the custodial parent, she's with them, and they're living with her and not in their own household in their father's palace. So they're in the Alexander Palace. Ella, of course, was Alexandra's sister, and I'm not sure why Dimitri didn't like that, because you would think he would like being in such close proximity to Nicholas, and in a place where there are, after all, so many guards. There are troops on duty. But yeah, for whatever reason, we don't know why he would have preferred to be in the big palace. So he's resumed his habit from Ilinskaya of writing his diary every day at around 7:30, I suppose, and finishing up at 7:45, and sort of sticking to the routine that Ella had established for herself and the children. And there were a few I had meant to comment and forgotten about the last two diary entries for September, because one he had written at 10 o'clock and the other he had written at 10:30, and usually bedtime with Ella was, for the kids, was 10 o'clock. But maybe now that Maria was 16 and Dimitri was 15, and there was even a marriage in the works, or would be soon, for Maria. Maybe maybe Ella realized that she needed to give them a little more freedom and recognize that they were now young adults. So I don't know, that's speculation, but we'll see with upcoming diary entries if Ella is still with them and whether he is continuing to write at 7:45. All right, that's enough for now. Lots to think about with our friend, and I'll see you next time.